Internet Festival. Forme di futuro.
Sami Ben Gharbia, prego Sami, che è un attivista, un blogger, un pensatore tunisino. Mi siedo con lui perché faremo una chiacchierata appunto sullo stato di salute delle primavere arabe. Adesso parliamo in inglese, voi avete la traduzione. Ok, Sami Ben Gharbia appunto è tunisino, ha fondato un blogger che si chiama Nawaat, che ha preso tantissimi premi, è tornato, lui stava in Europa quando è iniziato tutto questo e poi è tornato in Tunisia, where you still live right now. You still resist in Tunisia. Yeah. Okay, Sami, so welcome to Pisa. I guess that I want to start by asking you the question that everybody's asking here: is the Arab Spring really over?
No, no, I don't think it is. It is over. Well, it depends how we read, how we define and understand the Arab Spring. But from my point of view, my own experience in the region and my contact with other people working in other places around the same region, I think the region, the Arab world, wasn't really prepared to the revolutionary happening that started in December 2010 and was spread from Tunisia to Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, etc. And that's, I think, the core problem of what we call the Arab Spring, is that you have society with strong civil society networks and NGOs with the strong tradition of human rights, of opposition, with experiences in drafting constitution, in defending universal human rights, in having a place for feminism and women, in good educational system, in a lack of absence of tribes and ethnic crisis, etc. So the case of Tunisia, for example, represents in itself, and I think that was the reason why Tunisia was the trigger of the entire Arab Spring, is that the ingredients were good enough to harbor and host a revolutionary event like the one we've seen between 2010 and 11. In the contrary, other regions, other places, they didn't have the same ingredient. They, I think, in emotional and like brother link of Arabhood, they tried to copy-paste the experience that happened in Tunisia quickly without preparing the terrain, without preparing the field with decades of struggle and work. That's the problem we've seen. Like Egypt was prepared because they had like 2 centuries experience of reformism. They tried to reform everything. They failed. They had revolution in the 50s with nationalistic ideology, and they failed. They have wars, etc. But at least they have a strong tradition. Other countries, unfortunately, they weren't prepared to have radical change from dictatorship to democracy. And that's why we've seen reverse actually transition. Instead of going from authoritarian regime to democracy, we're seeing other things happening. And then you have this complex network of ethnicity, of religions, identities, the birth of the nation state in itself in the Arab world, which was a product of Sykes-Picot, which was product of decolonization movements, was based on authoritarian ideologies of nationalism that gave power to one man, to one political party, sometimes to one ethnicity, to one tribe, to one family. And it didn't help build a real nation state. And that's why we've seen an explosion of hates between tribes, sometimes between religious groups, sometimes between political parties in other places and parts of the Arab world. So I think it is a phase that the Arab world needs to go through. It is an identical crisis. Can we live together if we don't have a dictator who is controlling everything? Iraq was stable in a way under Saddam Hussein because it's like a secular kind of regime with a strong hand controlling everything. Like Syria was kind of stable under Hafez al-Assad because the Alawite and the establishment was controlling everything, and the religious groups could live together between Sunni, Shia, Alawi, Christians. So they could live together under dictatorship. So why they couldn't live together when the freedom is there? I think it is identity crisis that they need to go through, unfortunately, with many blood, with many sacrifices, with many waves of killing and refugees and exiles. I mean, the same happened in Europe between Orthodox or Catholics and Reformists in the Netherlands. So I think every part of the world, with the complex puzzle of identities, they need to find a social pact how we can live together. And unfortunately, it's going through blood in some part of the other world, but other parts are managing to go through this transition in a peaceful manner.
Yeah, I want to ask you something specific about Tunisia, because we don't hear anymore anything in the news, at least in this part of the world, about Tunisia, as if it were disappeared completely. What's happening in Tunisia right now? How is the transition going? What are the issues on the table for civil society?
Yeah, well, Tunisia usually being given mainly in Western media, especially in the US, as the success story of the Arab Spring. In a way, it is true. If we compare, of course, with other part of the Arab world, with Libya or with Yemen or with Syria or Iraq or Egypt, it is the most successful story in which the actors, at least of the political establishment and civil society actors, managed to find a consensus on how to run an election, how to win an election, how to have an opposition, how to build institutions, draft a constitution while respecting the rights of minorities, etc. That being said, there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of really fostering and respecting rights and freedoms. So in terms of this smooth political transition, although some political assassination happened in Tunisia, many terrorist attack occurred between 2011 and 2016, which affected the economy and the well-being of the Tunisian transition. And it brought again this old concept of, do you prefer security, open freedom, or vice versa? And that debate actually dominated the Tunisian media since 2013, starting from the first terrorist attack till now. The old establishment, some will call it the deep state, I think is still in working. The former political establishment in alliance with business elites in Tunisia and media, mainstream media actors are reshaping the discourse of a nostalgical authoritarian comeback. I think they won't succeed. Economically, they're succeeding, the economic policy and the path that Tunisia, at least the governments that were elected between 2011 and now, they're choosing a neoliberal path with the support of the World Bank and the IMF, and which is more debt and recession impact mainly on the region that triggered the revolution with demand for social justice and dignity and freedom. So in terms of achievement, when it comes to economy, when it comes to access to equality between region, I think Tunisia failed hugely in achieving that. Some people will say, okay, in 5 years you cannot solve the entire problems of the country. But I think the main failure is visionary failure of the political establishment, whether they are ruling, sitting in the government, or whether they are in the opposition. There is like blurred barrier between left and right, what is left, what is right. The left lost entirely in front of the conservative alliance, which is composed of the Islamist and the liberal one, the secular one, which is now ruling the country. It's a conservative alliance between Islamists and seculars who are neoliberal in the way of ruling and seeing the economy. So there is a success in terms of achieving some constitutional basis for the newborn democracy, and there is failures in terms of the economic policy of the country.
Let's talk a little bit about digital activism and citizen journalism. You are the co-founder of a very famous blog collective called Nawaat, which started long before the revolution, and it's still existing. So can you describe us, like, and when it started you were in exile, right? You were in Europe. So can you describe us the different phases you went through with your baby, with Nawaat? Because you started it when you were a dissident, and then you went back to Tunisia after the fall of Ben Ali, and now you're still there struggling. And I guess Nawaat has changed a lot also in terms of, so can you?
Yeah, well, briefly, like it started in 2004, like with a group of friends, we started this blog called Nawaat, which means the core in Arabic. And the idea was like to politicize the internet, because the internet, like back in the early 2000s, wasn't really political. So you get some websites that are owned and run by opposition party or human rights groups, but a citizen platform that hosts like opinions and debate things was really lacking, although there were many attempts and initiatives that were very successful, and then they stopped. So now it was this kind of project that tried to, from abroad, from the exile, as you said, I was in exile in the Netherlands, try to give voices to the voiceless and try to link the diaspora with those who are in the country. Mainly it was about human rights reporting, about human rights abuse, exposing what's going on in Tunisia, and having some leaks from inside the administration. And it worked quite well. I mean, the strategy to politicize the internet and the blog sphere like was successful later on in 2009 and 10 when the revolution started. The internet activism field in Tunisia was prepared to respond quickly to the on-the-ground happening. So we were quite well trained in terms of formats, in terms of the know-how of the new information technology. Unlike other countries where the digital activism scene was really kind of like starting, and they didn't really understand how to deal with new technology. Well, after the revolution, we decided to go back home. I was like 14 years almost in the Netherlands, so I just immigrated back to my country. And we turned this like citizen blog into a kind of alternative media with like 20 employees, full-time and many part-time and freelancers. And because we miss it to be on the ground, that's why we are very attached to be on the ground and to travel around the country and to try to give voices to marginalized communities, successful initiatives that are being carried out by NGOs, by grassroots activists. And we are in the same strategy. We have a big section of leaks and investigation, long forms, articles, and we have a strong video section of video production and documentaries. And we have a strong opinion platform where people can publish their own opinion. So it is the same model, free. We try to be free from businesses. We don't run any advertisements, so we are like kind of grant-based alternative media. We're still seeking economic model, which is not really easy in a country like Tunisia. But in a way, we failed when we can speak about the mainstream media and the dominant and established media, because they are much more powerful to shape public opinion thanks to the resources they have, to the money they have, and the network they have, with still a minority voice within the country.
Yeah, I remember in 2010 I read an essay written by Sami, which was quite telling. It's still, for me, one of the most enlightening pieces about the status of digital activism, and he used the word fallacy. What do you, can you go through your criticism about digital activism in the region, and can you tell us what are, in your view, in your opinion now, in 2016, the major challenges that you are facing?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, well, by then when I wrote, I was working as advocacy director for an international NGO focusing on this like digital activism and blogging, which was Global Voices. So I was more active in the global scene and regional scene with Arab Bloggers Conference that I organized, and through which we met first time in Beirut. And then after the revolution, I decided to cut that link with the global and regional and to focus on Tunisia, because I think the country needs like our efforts and attention better than to give attention and focus on other places. And that's where the defragmentation of the Arab like networks of activists started to happen in 2011. So my concern then was that the foreign governments, mainly the United States, and some corporation coming from Silicon Valley, mainly Google, and later Twitter and Facebook and others, started to interfere within the digital activism in the Arab world by training, funding, shaping the agenda of some groups and some activists, financing them. And the targeted country by then was mainly Iran, China, Syria, let's say the states that were hostile to the US policy in their own region. Tunisia, like now, it's not important anymore, although it proved to be important in creating a wave of revolutionary process through the Arab world and beyond. But by then, when we spoke about Tunisia, how it is very tough in censoring internet, how it is anti-free speech, etc., nobody will care about Tunisia, because on the geopolitical map, Tunisia doesn't mean anything compared to countries where there are oil, there are gas, there are natural resources, etc. So Tunisia wasn't really important. And that's how I discovered the hypocrisy of those who are supporting digital activism, because they care more about country with certain weight, and they don't care about other countries. So there is double standards in supporting freedom all over the world. And that's where I started to be like disappointed by this kind of support that is coming from some Western country. And I think the same thing is happening. When we look at Syria or when we look at Iran, we see how much money is being given to activists all over the places, how many training happened to digital activists. So what's the result? I think it's more catastrophe than a disaster than any other thing. What's the achievement of those programs? And you have hundreds of websites about Syria, but can you really curate the true information? I think there is more noise than really true information when it comes to Syria. Propaganda from all sides, and it's very hard to really, from someone who is not following, it is very hard to find the truth. So my concern is that by getting aid and finance from a foreign country, we might lose our own path and our own agenda. So we need to be careful with who we will go into alliance and from who we can get money or training or support, etc.
Right. One last thing before wrapping up. Can you tell us what do you think that what's the future of citizen journalism in the region? So what's the direction that alternative media could take now in 2016 after the bubble has exploded?
Well, I think the finding itself, like from our own experience as media manager, I think we failed in front of mainstream media. They are much more robust, they have more resources, and they really can shape public opinion. Although we can publish amazing articles and have good investigative piece and publish leaks that really shape some laws. Sometimes in Tunisia we were very instrumental in writing some articles in the constitution. We stopped many laws that we've seen on human rights, etc. So we are influential when it comes to the establishment, but we are not influential between the average masses, because the mass in general wants to read buzz, funny stuff, things that are intellectually lazy to digest and understand and deconstruct. And the main reason is the lack of, I think, resources, and the most challenge, I think, for the mainstream, the citizen media is to find the right economic model that will help all this independent media initiative to go beyond this model of having grants and proposal from funders, and start to build social enterprises that will fund the media in the same time. So then I think the next battle is a battle of how to build an economic model that will sustain citizen media in the Arab world.
Okay, great. But so there is something in the making on the ground, right? There is a struggle which we probably don't see from here, because it's not so visible as it used to be in 2011 with big masses. But revolution is still, revolution like meaning a process of change, is still in the making.
Yeah, I think it is still in the making. When we see, at least if we take Tunisia as an example, if you see you take a look at the cultural production, if you count the numbers of movies that were produced since 2011 to now, there is no way to compare that with what was the situation before the revolution. The number of the production of music, arts, comics, books, the debate that are being organized. There is a generation that, like 6 years ago, they were like 10 years old. Now they are 16 years old, and they live it during 6 years in freedom, in a free country where they can speak out their mind. I don't think that generation, that's the most important thing. There is a new generation that is born and raised. It's short period, but I think they won't give up their freedom anymore, and that's the hope that I think is remaining, because I don't see the kids in Tunisia that witnessed freedom will give up freedom one day. So I'm hopeful, because there is a very vibrant cultural and intellectual life happening in Tunisia, mainly in the art scene, culture, and other like social enterprise spirit that's going through many small community and small villages where new startups are being funded and try to help the community without that capitalistic vision of profit for the private. So I think it is a long struggle. I'm still hopeful that we will make something good out of it.
Inshallah. Okay, thank you, Sami. I'm happy that we had this conversation and it's ending with a bright note for the future, that the Arab Spring is not over, but will take longer, a little bit longer than just a Facebook revolution.
Internet Festival. Forme di futuro.